Chapter 17. Tense Moments. Nancy's first impression on entering was that the chamber appeared to be a cross between a printing shop and a United States mint. Counterfeiters, she thought excitedly. Hand presses stood about and several engraved plates had been left on a table. Various chemicals and inks were in evidence. Neat stacks of paper money lined one wall, and other bills were scattered carelessly on the floor. Never in all her life had Nancy seen so much money. The room was cluttered with it. $20 bills appeared to be everywhere. Money, still damp, was drying on tables. Nancy observed that all the bills seemed to be of the $20 denomination. At last she had the answer to the many questions which had been troubling her. This was the secret of the cave. The latest racket of the Hale Syndicate. The nature cult was a hoax. Its so-called mysterious rites used only as a screen to hide the work of a clever band of counterfeiters. The Black Snake Colony seemed to her to be a perfect name. Nancy realized that if she did not try to get away and bring help now, she and her friends would fail. There was nothing they could do by themselves. Nancy turned to relay her intentions to Bess and George. A slight tug on their ropes was all that was needed to make them understand, but to put the plan into operation was another matter. The girls attempted to edge toward the chamber entrance by degrees, but Al Sneed stood barring the door. For the time being, escape was out of the question. They must bide their time. As long as some members of the organization remained masked, the girls knew they would be comparatively safe. But already several people had stripped off their robes and headpieces. Every minute that the girls' escape was delayed increased the danger of detection. Since it was impossible to sneak away, Nancy made careful note of her surroundings and tried to identify the faces on her mind. Except for Yvonne, the leader Maurice Hale, Al Sneed, and the man she had seen on the train, all were strangers. 6 people besides Bess, George, and herself remained masked. As Nancy surveyed the elaborate equipment in the workroom, she realized that this was an unusually large gang of counterfeiters. The engraved plate, which had been copied from an actual United States government $20 bill, was a work of art. Probably the leader of the gang had at one time been noted as a skilled engraver and had decided to use his talents to unlawful advantage. Nancy carefully glanced about the room. Maurice Hale was looking over some stacks of counterfeit money, while several members of the gang talked quietly. Bess and George automatically followed Nancy's gaze, but stood perfectly still next to her near the table. Nancy, under ordinary circumstances, could not have told the counterfeit money from the real thing, with the picture of Jackson on the face and the White House on the back. But now that she had been alerted to examine the bills carefully, she noted that the color and texture of the paper appeared to be at fault. When Nancy felt sure that she was not being observed, she stealthily picked up one of the bills and tucked it inside her robe as evidence. "We made a pretty fair week's profit," Maurice Hale said gruffly as he stacked the bills into several large piles. "You distributors and passers keep up like this for another month, and I'd say we'll all be on Easy Street." "The racket won't last another month," Al Sneed growled. "I tell you, the federal agents are getting wise that the phony stuff's being passed around here." "Bah!" Hale replied contemptuously. "Let them be suspicious. They wouldn't think of this out-of-the-way place as our headquarters in 1,000 years. Nancy could not help but smile at his words. That's what he thinks. The next voice that spoke startled Nancy. She recognized it instantly as belonging to Mr. Kent. the would-be buyer of Redgate Farm. "Yeah, maybe not," he was saying. "Still, it's too bad the old lady wouldn't sell her place. Then we'd really have a set-up." It flashed through Nancy's mind that her hunch had been right about Mr. Kent being involved with the hillside cult. No wonder they wanted to obtain Redgate Farm. It would have been a better headquarters for the gang than the cave. The girl detective strained her ears as the conversation continued. A woman next to Kent said scornfully, "I only hope your bright idea about that fake letter we took to the Drew girl and cutting the farm telephone wires doesn't backfire." So, Nancy told herself, it was Kent and the woman who had just spoken who were the ones responsible for that part of the mystery. Mr. Kent also was undoubtedly the driver of the car which had slowed down one evening near the farmhouse. Meanwhile, the leader went on deftly stacking the money. Nancy and her friends watched him with increasing uneasiness. When the various members of the organization were called upon to accept their share of the counterfeit bills, they would doubtless remove their masks. How would the girls escape detection then? Nancy realized the situation was becoming more serious. She and her friends must escape before the actual distribution of the money began. If only Al Sneed would move away from the door. One thought comforted Nancy. Joanne was on guard outside the cave. If worst came to worst and escape was cut off, Joanne undoubtedly would become alarmed and hurry back to the farmhouse for help. "We may have to make a dash for it," Nancy warned George in a whisper. "If that man moves away from the door, be ready." Al Sneed did not move, however, and it seemed to the girls that he was watching them. They wondered if their whispering had made him suspicious. Bess trembled slightly and moved nearer Nancy. Maurice Hale had finished counting the money and, glancing over the assembly, announced in a commanding voice, "Well, those of you who haven't removed your masks had better do it one by one. I want to be sure no one is here who shouldn't be." He pointed to Bess. "You first." Nancy and her friends felt themselves go cold. They were trapped. There was nothing they could do now but make a wild dash for safety. "Ready?" Nancy muttered under her breath. Before the girls could put their ideas into action, they were startled by a loud commotion in the tunnel. An instant later, the guard, who had been stationed at the entrance of the cave, burst into the chamber. He was half dragging a young girl who fought violently to free herself. The victim was Joanne. End of chapter 17.